Welcome to Beyond Birth Trauma, From Burden to Brilliance, where we uncover the powerful truth about your beginnings and how they've shaped your entire life. I'm Shannon O'Flaherty, and in this show, we are not just exploring your birth, we are dismantling the chains of generational trauma. We're diving into the core of who you are, peeling back layers of inherited beliefs and behaviors that have held you back for far too long. This isn't just about understanding your past. It is about reclaiming your future. Get ready to break free. This is Beyond Birth Trauma, From Burden to Brilliance, and your transformation starts now.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I want to just thank you all for tuning us in and turning us on. You are listening to Beyond Birth Trauma. I am Dr. Pat. I get to take this fabulous wild ride of life with Shannon. And, this is such an important conversation. And Shannon, what you do is so profoundly pivotal for people to heal. I want to talk about today's episode. Let's talk about energy. And let me just start out by just making a comment, and then love to hear what you have been able to teach people about energy. Energy is interesting. I was walking the other day, taking down my Christmas decorations, right? My holiday decorations. And I had a flashback. I don't know what age I was. I don't know where. Clearly I was young. And I had this moment of sadness, profound sadness, right? That I couldn't connect the dots. But the flashback came back from some very early years. And without even a blink of an eye, you could see I was getting emotional. And then, of course, I moved on. Everything is energy, but I never forgot the energy of that moment as I was taking down my inflatable blow-up airplane Santa. What do you think of that for an energy conversation?
Wow. Well, I don't know if you had inflatable blow-up and Santas when you were a little girl, but often Christmas holds a lot of memories. Christmas as a whole in itself. I know in my family, I have Christmas decorations from when I was a little kid, things that I used to hang on the tree every year that is still part of our tradition. And my stocking that my mother made me, and I took up the mantle and made all of the stockings for my kids and so on. So Christmas in itself, because it's usually a family time, is loaded with a lot of memories because it's that energy that has infused that Christmas tradition, or even the ornaments themselves or the stockings or whatever it is, and it triggers a memory in you. I can really relate because I went back to the States this Christmas to have Christmas with my dad and my sister. And although it wasn't my family's normal tradition because I was in the States, just going back to my homeland. Oh my gosh, just driving through the towns, remembering I had 100 million memories of stuff that I have not thought about in years and years and years, because it's just energy that's all sitting there just waiting for me to drive through again, even though it's so much further on along the way.
It's fascinating. I'm a sci-fi buff. I always have been from a very young age, even back then, blow-up age. And you know what I did have? I had a blow-up doll. And it was a big blow-up doll that I was able to punch with boxing gloves my uncles gave me. Right.
Wow.
And so I had that fantasy. I forget what we call that thing. But the energy of what you and I are talking about is so important. And I want to talk about thoughts for a minute. There was a reason that the movies, series, trilogy, The Matrix became so popular. It did something no other movie had done before quite that well. And that is integrate mind, body, and spirituality in an alternate reality. And doing it in a way that average people understood that was brilliant. But can we talk about thoughts and how we respond and how they relate to action? You know,
Yeah, Absolutely. I mean, there is, as we all know, there is no original thought, right? That's like you see these crazy movies and people think, where did they come up with that? Well, like it's all out there. It's all out there for the taking, right? So energy, your own energy starts with a thought. And that thought is something that we've learned and modeled from our parents, from before we could even speak. And then it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy that it just keeps playing out. And that thought then becomes behavior because we think something and then we say something, which is behavior. It becomes our response mechanism. I mean, we might take action on it, or we might shut up also, which is part of our response mechanism. So our thoughts create the energy dynamic in which we live. Our thoughts create our words create our actions, and they're all connected
Mm.
to our physicality. If we keep thinking sad thoughts, we're going to be sad. I mean, if I think about my mother dying and losing my mother, I could start crying on a dime, right? But if I think about happy thoughts and hysterical times that I've had with my mother, I can start laughing immediately because of that energy of the emotion. Our emotions are energy. Our thoughts are energy. Our words are energy. Our responses are energy. Everything is. Everything in the world is energy. Your laptop, your relationship with your laptop is energy. That's why you don't want to curse at it and throw it out the window when it upsets you.
Oh my gosh, I could go into a whole story about that. But, can you talk for a minute about something that I think we don't talk about enough, and that's our cellular memory
Mhm.
and how that gets into our cells. But what does that even mean? But that's connected to looking at our familiar line. That's the kind of look, I knew growing up there was something different with grandpa. I knew it. Grandpa would do things that the other relatives didn't. The music he listened to wasn't Mario Lanza. It was Latino music. I mean, there was something different in my grandpa's shack that stayed with me. So what's the punchline? Oh, the punchline is here comes the internet. Here comes ancestry. Papa was born in Brazil and was a farmer. Okay. But the memory of that came before.
That's right. So we hold 7 generations of cellular memory in
Wow.
us, right? Each baby has the seeds of their mother in them, and the mother has the seeds of her mother in them, and the grandmother has the seeds of her mother in them, and so on and so on. And so all of those generations of memories, of struggles, of thoughts, of behavior get passed down to the next generation. It's even scientifically shown that if you have an ancestor that was a prisoner of war, even though they were in the prisoner of war camp and struggling, they weren't in struggle mode. They were in survival mode. And that's a very different mode. And so sometimes that struggle and suffering energy skips a generation and zips into the grandchild. And then the grandchild grows up suffering, not really understanding why they're suffering so much because their grandparent wasn't really talking about the suffering. Their grandparent was talking about survival, or if they've ever spoken about it before. We learn prejudice from our ancestors. We learn fear. We learn fear of God from our ancestors because way back in the olden days, God was a punishing God, not the first love, light, vibration of the spiritual, larger entity that is God that we know it to be now. So, depending on what was passed down and what keeps playing out, is how we hold all of these generations of cellular memory in our bodies,
Yeah.
right?
You and I have something in common, and I want to talk about this. I didn't know it as a baby, but my mom was seriously depressed. She was addicted to back then prescription drugs because that's what you gave women that were a little feisty, You gave them,
Mhm.
you just gave them Dr. Jacoby.
Yeah, numb them out.
Just
Yeah,
numb them
that's right.
out.
Yeah.
But that coupled with alcohol gives you pretty much a formula for disaster. And I'm 12 years younger than my sister. So here I am in a situation. But we don't even think about that. We don't think about the impact of that. Now, how do I know any of that? Well, my mom left letters that my dad tried to throw out that my stepmom kept. to me from Bellevue, the mental hospital.
Wow, that's amazing.
Right? Thank you, stepmama, Mama
Well,
Doris. You
yeah,
got to
I
love
mean,
her.
however upsetting the letters may have been, what an incredible gift because you're actually getting historical evidence and ancestors to your becoming. And a lot of people worry, a lot of clients worry, they go, well, I don't know my birth story, my parents are dead, da 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 da. But we have so much intuition and inner knowing in us, and we know what our behavior patterns are, we know what our behaviors are, we know what our thoughts are, how we think, we know the repeating things that trigger us all of the time. So the familial imprint, and if you have siblings, you can just look at your sibling too, and anything you remember about your parents. So the familial baseline is what was that main kind of energy that was dropped down from the ancestral line that
Yeah.
stuck with your parents. So both of my parents have sadness and shame on both sides. And if anybody in your family is an addict of any kind, there's going to be a lot of escapism kind of energy. So alcoholism is escapism. If there's drugs, if there's gambling, if there's any addiction of any kind, you know that they're escaping from something. So if you've got escapism energy going on, what is that? Is it because of sadness? Is it because of anger? Is it because of shame? Is it because of judgment? It could be from 100 million different things. The same scenario for different families could play out in two different ways. My grandmother buried 7 babies before my grandfather lived, right? Then he was in the Merchant Marines and he went blind from welding, improper eye care. But why didn't all of his colleagues go blind too? It could be that he didn't want to see the sadness of his mother over and over and over, and he took to drinking. And so then my mother, she was sad too because her mother was sad and liked plants more than people. And so my mother took to drinking. And on my father's side, his father died when he was 14. And so his mother was grieving and he was sad and everybody was sad. There was so much sadness and shame. Shame, 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 sadness. But for another family, those same kind of experiences could have manifested with like fear of loss, fear of whatever, right? In my family, it happened to manifest as sadness. Depression runs in both families. Alcoholism runs in both families. So you're not just looking at my mother's line, looking at my father's line as well. And and then how do they manifest in you? How do they register in you? What do you do? How did you play out in it, right? So I've had an interesting life of
Yeah. Yeah.
learning
Yeah.
learning a lot of things the hard way and learning to overcome a lot of things, but not everybody goes into this field. So maybe they don't learn to overcome things and they're just living with this heaviness of their family that isn't really even their stuff.
Yeah. I want to ask you about this question in terms of, programming, because we don't even now know the impact of COVID as we're on the cusp of that fear now of picking up another COVID type thing, because that's now happening, right?
Yeah.
I can't even begin to talk about the triggers around that. But we spent this time, and I just often wonder, I'd love to hear from you. I've often wondered what happened during COVID where people were so emotionally distraught, not based on COVID by itself, but based on this birth trauma, based on things that may have happened. And at the same time, they're not talking about it. It's like I've been scared for 2 years, but hello, let me just move on with my life. I mean, what do? We back up to programming. Like in my case, my programming was mom drank, I'll drink. Oh, that feels better.
Yeah, well, because you can numb anything out for a certain amount of time, and I think there was a lot of numbing out going on in COVID in a big way for lots of people, and so the relief of COVID and lockdown ending was people going, "Oh, good, I don't have to numb out anymore. I'll just get back to normal." Except that the world hasn't gotten back to normal, pre-COVID normal. no way. People don't go out as much. People are on Zoom and the internet so much more. The whole purpose of COVID was to fragment humanity, spiritually. And so people have been left on their own. So the way that people used to play out as opposed to how they're now playing out has changed. So people are now kind of starting all over again with a whole new mode of being. Well,
Yeah.
how do I deal with this in this mode with people being in a different way, of people receiving me differently, of me having different feelings, of me maybe some people faced all of their fears and had massive spiritual awakenings during COVID. I'm sure that happened too. A lot of relationships broke down because they thought, hold on a minute, this isn't the person that I thought that I was with, because everybody's stuff came up.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you look at your stuff before you get thrown into a closet where you have to deal with it with everybody, then it's easier to unpick it slowly, carefully in a sacred held space so that you can cope with all of it.
I want to talk to you about this because my language, not yours, it's like the veil got lifted. And what's happening, we're starting to see the results of it. Somebody heard a show I did the other day where I gave out a statistic and they called me and they said, we're fact checking you. Where'd you get that from? I said, Google it. Gray divorces. What does that mean? People, so they, if you're a bit older and you got this gray hair, that's why they call them gray, because you got gray hair. It's like a gray. I mean, couldn't we be a little bit more creative with that? But anyway, gray divorce is triple now. And I attributed it to post COVID discomfort because I don't have your skill. But I know that it doesn't always show up with an action. We get these emotions. It's taken people 2 years to get to the point where they're looking at each other and saying, honey, you ain't that person that I don't care if you're gray and I'm gray, I'm out of here. But people are not willing to stay in discomfort, and yet they're not willing to understand that the veil has been lifted and they need some help.
Yeah, I think that what happened in COVID, which kind of fast forwarded this process for a lot of people, is that the fear that kicked in was, wow, is this what the rest of life is going to be like? Is this how it's going to be? Because nobody knew. I didn't know. Was I ever going to see my dad again? Would I ever travel again? I didn't know. And so you start to ask the deeper questions. Is this really all there is to life? Is this what's really important to me? And you start to get rid of all of the fluff, all of the stuff that you've just been filling in, all of those kind of empty spaces with, oh, you're fun, you'll do, this is smart, oh, this food is interesting. And you start to really sit and get quiet. This is where meditation comes in, and stillness, to still this monkey brain of constantly overthinking everything so that you can get still and start to ask yourself, what actually really matters? What brings me joy? What keeps me in alignment on a daily basis? And when we were born, we're still connected. The veil that you're talking about is that that bit between the subconscious and the reality,
Yeah.
material reality, right? And we're still connected when we're born to the subconscious spiritual realm. We're not fully here in the material reality, and then we learn to suppress that, to dumb that down so that we can deal with the material world, with gravity, with things that we can actually see with our eyes, not just with our third eye, not just with our intuitive knowing and ability. And so when we're kids, we're still really wide awake and connected to that veil. And when that gets shut down, we feel lost, because when we were born, we knew why we came here. And then that's shut down, and then we forget why we've come here. So I think these gray divorces that you're talking about, I hadn't heard that term before.
I know, it's weird, right?
silver at least, come on. And I think it's because people, and there's much more available in terms of meditation and spiritual practices now. And I think that people are learning to get still and go within a lot more and reconnect themselves to that spiritual realm that we knew, that feels like home inside our hearts, that most of people for most of our lives are disconnected from
Yeah.
that. And I remember consciously being shut down. I remember the process. I was like 5, 6, and I was like crazy because I mean, I didn't consciously know what was happening, but I knew something was happening. And I thought, you grown-ups have no idea. And I just thought, you just don't understand. You don't understand. I remember really feeling that way. And I think one
Yeah.
little part of me just decided, no, no, just hang on to that little piece of whatever this is that's true while I have to grow up and become
Yeah.
an adult. And I think that's why I've always been like so passionately a free spirit and a free child because I want to keep that inner knowing
Yeah.
that.
I love that you described it like that. I want to just mention everybody you're listening to Beyond Birth Trauma. Shannon, before we go ahead, please give out the website because it's more than just a conversation here. This is the work you do to help people.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
the work you do. So please give out your website. Let folks know how they can connect with you.
Yeah, shannonbtb.com or shannonoflaherty.com. Shannonbtb.com, easier to write. Please book a 20-minute free mind shift call because I do work one-to-one with people, but I want to have a call with you to make sure we have the right kind of energy to
Mhm.
work together. Because if you're working with a therapist that you don't like or you don't think that they get you, you're wasting your time and money. And so is the therapist. So let's make sure that we have a great connection so that we can actually have a conversation and get down deep. Because the more open and vulnerable you can get with your therapist, the deeper you can go, and then the more you can heal. Yeah.
I love what you just talked about too. And this is where people need the help. We all need that help to get our way back. I'm just going to say get our way back for lack of a better word. But what I mean by that is that spark we had as a kid, I still have that. See,
Yes.
somehow that wasn't like, I don't know what you want to call it, but I still have that young childlike, almost to a fault, my friends would say, that childlike view of the world and that independence because we had to be independent. So my independence always got me in trouble. Like, okay, I'm going across the street, play with the big boys, or whatever that was that I did as a young kid. But what I learned later in life, the independence for me and the freedom for me is to get back to that spiritual side of me. And
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
hard to heal without that, isn't it?
it really is. And I mean, it first starts to get shut down when we're little kids with all the rules and regulations from our parents, which were there hopefully just to keep us safe. So we lived near the Premium River, which we affectionately called the swamp, because when it was low tide, it smelled like the swamp, which is for some strange reason a really lovely smell of my childhood. And we were not allowed to go in the river. And just this Christmas, I was sitting there, an old friend who lived behind me came over and we were talking about the river and crossing the river, and he mentioned about going in the river, and I was like, oh no, because my dad was sitting right there. He goes, oh no, well, yeah, when we were going in the river, and I was like, no, we were not allowed to go in the river. And I looked at my dad like I was still going to get in trouble because I went in the river. But it was that good girl in me when I was a little kid. Like it would
Yeah.
take a lot for me to purposefully break the rules because I had to be the good girl also, even though I wanted to go and explore and be the adventurer.
Yeah.
So it's a whole mix of feelings, and that kind of push pull inside all of us goes on throughout lifetime.
It does. I was so fortunate. My sister was 12 years older, and I feel for her. She died way before, I mean, guilt and shame. We'll do a whole show on that. But my sister was that good girl, had to be the good girl. And the job she had was unattainable, to take care of me and my mom because she was 12 years older, right? When I'm 6, she's like, what? In her teens, trying to be a teenager, and that never happened for her. But, part of this that I love talking with you about is for us to get to the place where we can remember that side of ourselves and that joy. And I think that independence led us to different things. I had an epiphany the other day. I was talking to Linda about this show that I'm doing now with you. And I had a flashback. And lo and behold, I was talking to her about my affinity to the color gold and gold things. What am I wearing today?
Yeah,
Didn't think about that consciously. But Linda said, why do you think that is? And I said, I know why. I was a kid that got bounced around, and I spent a lot of time with my Aunt Grace and my Aunt May in church. And if you go to a church in New York, what do you overcome by in churches in New York? Everything's gold.
Lots of gold. Yeah. I was just in my favorite church in New York, actually.
But you know what I mean?
It's true. Everything is an imprint in your life, from the Christmas ornaments to the gold in church, to the memories you had as a kid, to the feeling of, oh no, I'm breaking the rules, to the deeper feelings of, oh, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, I'm bad, I'm whatever it is, to the shame, to the sadness. All of these are imprints, and we carry them with us all the time, and they affect our daily life decisions and behaviors in every aspect of what we do. And some of them are good and some of them hold us back. So let's deal with the ones that hold us back and get rid of them, or have a new relationship with them at least.
Thank you for today. Again, give out your website. And there's a reason why I didn't take my sister's journey. My nickname was Pat the Brat. So that will give you a little bit of information about it. I'm the kid that when you go to St. Patrick's Cathedral, or you go to Mount St., whatever that was that we used to go to, any of them, I'm the kid that walks in and sees the holy water, and on a very hot summer day, takes my hands, puts it in the holy water, and washes my face.
Well, Pat the Brat, that's why you and I get along so well. And it's shannonbtb.com. Or ShannonO'Flaherty.com. Book a free mind shift call, and let's see where we can take you and figure out your limiting patterns so that you can be the best version of yourself this year.
And I want everybody to remember from Shannon today that yes, everything is energy, but you know what? We get to change it. Shannon, thank you so much for today. And I want to thank my subconscious or my unconscious for showing up in gold today. Thank you all for tuning us in and turning us on. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Beyond Birth Trauma, From Burden to Brilliance with Shannon O'Flaherty on Transformation Talk Radio. On the second Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific Time, we connect the dots between your ancestors, your birth, and the patterns that keep you stuck, guiding you to a place of profound healing and unstoppable brilliance. By examining and healing your cellular imprint from birth of how you perceive and respond to the world and the challenges that are created in your day-to-day life, we can begin to heal and live more balanced and fulfilling lives. For more information, visit shannonbtb.com. That's shannonbtb.com.